My husband gave me a gift on our anniversary. And when I opened it, there were divorce papers inside. I wish I were joking. I wish this was one of those dramatic stories people exaggerate online. But no, this really happened to me. My name is Evelyn Carter, and I was married to the same man for 42 years before he decided to hand me an envelope that would turn my entire life upside down. But before I tell you what happened next, do me a small favor. If you enjoy emotional, real stories about strength, betrayal, and powerful comebacks, make sure you subscribe to this channel, because my story gets wilder than you can imagine. And trust me, you'll want to hear how I turned the tables on my husband in just 10 days. Now let me take you back to that night. It was our anniversary dinner. 42 years of marriage. 42 years of cooking his favorite meals, raising our 2 sons, supporting his career, standing beside him through every storm life threw our way. So yes, I expected flowers. Maybe a bracelet. Maybe even just a sweet card. What I didn't expect was betrayal. The dining room smelled like rosemary chicken and buttered potatoes. I had set the table with the good china, the one we only use for special occasions. 2 candles flickered between us while soft jazz played from the old speaker near the window. My husband, Daniel, sat across from me, strangely quiet. Normally he would crack jokes, tease me about my cooking, or complain about the music. But that night he barely looked at me. I remember thinking, maybe he's planning a surprise. Halfway through dinner, he reached into his briefcase. Not a gift bag. Not flowers. Just a plain brown envelope. He slid it across the table toward me. "Happy anniversary," he said flatly. "No es mail. No worms." Just those 2 words. I laughed a little, thinking maybe it was some kind of joke. "Daniel, what is this? You forgot how gifts work." I teased. He didn't laugh. My stomach twisted. Still smiling nervously, I opened the envelope. Inside were several official documents. Legal documents. At first my eyes didn't fully process the words. But then I saw it. Petition for dissolution of marriage. Divorce papers. My hands started shaking so badly the papers slipped onto the table. I looked up at him, waiting for him to laugh, to say it was a prank. He didn't. Instead, he calmly took a sip of wine. "Daniel." My voice cracked. "What is this?" "You know exactly what it is," he said. Just like that. 42 years reduced to a sentence. I felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. "Is this a joke?" I whispered. "No." The candlelight flickered across his face, but his expression stayed cold. "I've already spoken to a lawyer," he continued. "You have 10 days to sign the papers." 10 days. I stared at him like I didn't recognize the man sitting across from me. This can't be real," I said, tears already filling my eyes. "After everything." He leaned back in his chair. "Evelyn, I'm tired. I want something different with the rest of my life. Something different." Like I was an old piece of furniture, he didn't want any more. My chest felt tight. "Is there someone else?" I asked quietly. He didn't answer. That silence told me everything. The tears came before I could stop them. 42 years. Birthdays. Christmas mornings. Hospital visits. Family vacations. Late-night talks. Did all of that mean nothing? "I gave you my life," I said through shaking breaths. Daniel checked his watch. "I'm not asking for a fight," he said calmly. "Just sign the papers within 10 days, and we'll keep this simple." 10 days. That was the amount of time he gave the woman who stood beside him for nearly half a century. Then he stood up. "I'll be staying at the lake house for a while," he added. "Think about it." And just like that, he walked out the door, leaving me sitting at the table, staring at divorce papers on our anniversary night. I cried harder than I had in years. But what Daniel didn't know was this. Those 10 days he gave me, they were about to become the biggest mistake of his life. Because in those 10 days, I wasn't going to beg. I wasn't going to break. I was going to turn the entire game around. And by the time Daniel realized what I had done, he would be the one begging me not to divorce him. But first, I had to discover the truth about why he really wanted to leave me. And when I did, everything changed. My husband gave me 10 days to sign the divorce papers. 10 days to erase 42 years of marriage like it meant nothing. And that first night after he walked out, I cried until my chest hurt. But something strange happened around 3 a.m. The tears stopped. Not because the pain disappeared, but because a quiet thought slipped into my mind. Daniel was hiding something. I had been married to that man for over 4 decades. I knew the way he breathed when he lied. I knew the little twitch in his jaw when he was nervous. And at dinner that night, he wasn't just cold. He was uncomfortable. Like a man who didn't want too many questions. I wiped my face, looked at the divorce papers again, and whispered to myself, "All right, Daniel, if you want a divorce so badly, I'm going to find out why." The next morning the house felt painfully quiet. For 42 years the sound of Daniel making coffee had been part of my mornings. The smell of burnt toast, because he always forgot it in the toaster, usually filled the kitchen. But that morning there was nothing. Just silence. And divorce papers sitting on the kitchen table. I read through them slowly, line by line. That's when something caught my attention. The lawyer's name. Grégory L. Whitman. I frowned. Daniel had always used a different attorney for business matters. So why this one? A small voice in my head whispered something I didn't want to believe. Because this lawyer handles something else. Divorces that needed to be quick. That afternoon, I did something I hadn't done in years. I drove downtown. The city looked the same as always, busy sidewalks, coffee shops filled with people typing on laptops, taxis honking in traffic. But inside my chest, everything felt different. I parked across from the law office listed on the paperwork. The building was modern, all glass windows and shiny steel. Definitely expensive. Definitely not the type of lawyer Daniel normally used. I sat in my car for nearly 15 minutes, debating whether I should go inside. But then I remembered Daniel's voice from the night before. Just sign the papers within 10 days. Like I was some inconvenience he wanted to clean up. That thought alone gave me the courage to step out of the car. The receptionist greeted me politely. "Good afternoon, how can I help you?" I forced a calm smile. "I'm here about a divorce filing," I said. She nodded and checked her computer. Name, Daniel Carter. Her fingers stopped typing. For a split second, her expression changed. It was quick, but I noticed. "Do you have an appointment?" she asked carefully. "No," I said. "But I'm his wife." That word felt strange coming out of my mouth. Wife. Technically, still true. The receptionist hesitated before standing. "Let me check if Mr. Whitman is available." As she disappeared down the hallway, my stomach twisted with nerves. Why had she looked surprised? 2 minutes later, a tall man in a gray suit appeared. "Mrs. Carter?" "Yes." He gestured toward his office. "Please come in." His office was enormous. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the entire city. This man clearly charged a lot for his services. He closed the door and folded his hands on the desk. "How can I help you today?" I placed the divorce papers in front of him. "These came from your office." He glanced down. Then something interesting happened. His polite smile faded slightly. "I see. I just have one question," I said quietly. "Go ahead. Why is my husband suddenly in such a rush to divorce me?" The lawyer leaned back in his chair. "I'm afraid I can't discuss private matters regarding my client." Of course. That's what I expected. But then I said something that made him pause. "Even if the divorce involves shared assets worth millions?" His eyebrows lifted slightly. Yes. Daniel might have acted like the king of the world. But half of everything he owned legally belonged to me. Our house. Our investments. His company shares. All of it. "I'm aware of the marital assets," the lawyer said carefully. "Good," I replied. "Then you also know this divorce won't be simple." For the first time, I saw uncertainty flicker across his face. And then I asked the question that changed everything. "Is my husband planning to remarry?" Silence filled the room. He didn't answer. But he didn't deny it either. That was all I needed. My heart sank, but at the same time, a strange calm settled over me. Because now I understood. Daniel wasn't just leaving me. He was replacing me. But what Daniel didn't realize yet was that his plan had one very dangerous flaw. Me. And over the next 10 days, I was about to uncover something that would make my husband regret ever handing me those papers. Because the woman he planned to build a new life with was hiding a secret that Daniel would never see coming. And when I exposed it, my husband wouldn't just regret divorcing me. He would beg me to stay. But first, I had to find out who she was. My husband gave me 10 days to sign the divorce papers. But by the second day, I already knew one thing for certain. There was another woman. And if Daniel thought I was going to sit quietly and cry while he replaced me after 42 years of marriage, then he clearly didn't know the woman he had married. Not anymore. That afternoon, I drove back home from the lawyer's office with my mind spinning. My chest still hurt from the betrayal, but the shock was slowly turning into something else. Clarity. Because when you've been married to someone for decades, you start noticing patterns. Little habits. Small routines. Daniel had always been predictable, which meant if there was another woman, there would be signs. I walked into our bedroom and sat on the edge of the bed for a long moment. Everything looked the same, his watch on the dresser, the framed photo of our sons on the wall, the blue tie he wore to our youngest boy's graduation. A whole life. And suddenly it felt like it had all been fake. I wiped my eyes and stood up. "All right, Evelyn," I whispered to myself. "Let's see what he's been hiding." I started with the obvious place. His office. Daniel had always been protective about that room. Not in a suspicious way, just in that typical businessman way. Papers organized in neat folders, documents carefully stacked, everything exactly where he wanted it. But one thing about living with someone for 42 years is that you learn their systems. You know where the real secrets are kept. I opened the top drawer of his desk. Pens. Paper clips. A calculator. Nothing unusual. The second drawer held tax documents and company files. Still normal. But the third drawer, the one he always locked, that one caught my attention. For years, I had never touched it. Because I trusted him. Now, trust was gone. I grabbed the small metal letter opener from the desk and gently pushed it into the lock. After a little pressure, click. The drawer slid open. Inside were several folders, neatly organized. At first glance, they looked like normal business paperwork. But then I saw something that made my stomach tighten. A hotel receipt. I slowly picked it up. It was from a luxury hotel downtown. 2 nights. Just 3 weeks ago. And the reservation wasn't for one person. It was for 2. My hands started trembling. 42 years. And this was how it ended? With hotel rooms and secrets? I kept digging through the drawer. And that's when I found the envelope. Inside were photographs. Not printed photos like the old days. These were pictures someone had clearly printed from a phone. The first picture showed Daniel sitting at a restaurant table. Across from him sat a woman. Young. Very young. Maybe early 30s. Long dark hair, bright smile, expensive dress. She looked at Daniel the way women look at men when they believe they've found someone powerful. Someone rich. Someone who can give them a better life. My heart sank as I stared at the picture. Because Daniel was smiling at her the same way he used to smile at me. Before life got busy. Before the kids grew up. Before he started staying late at the office. But then I noticed something interesting. In the corner of the photo, there was a reflection in the restaurant window. A sign. The name of the place. And suddenly my mind clicked. I knew that restaurant. It was one of those fancy rooftop places downtown where businessmen like to impress clients. Or impress women. I stared at the picture a little longer. The woman looked confident. Comfortable. Like she already believed she had won. And maybe she thought she had. Maybe she thought the older wife at home would quietly disappear once the divorce papers were signed. But she didn't know me. Not yet. I gathered the photos, the hotel receipt, and a few other documents from the drawer. Because if Daniel thought he was going to throw me away without consequences, he had clearly forgotten something important. I wasn't just his wife. For 42 years, I had helped him build everything he owned. Every investment. Every property. Every company deal. And if he wanted to start a new life with that woman, then I was going to make sure the truth about her came out first. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of tea, staring at the photographs again. The woman's smile looked almost rehearsed. like she had practiced it. And something about her eyes didn't feel right. I couldn't explain it yet. But after raising 2 sons and spending decades around business people, you develop instincts about people. And my instincts were screaming one thing. This woman wasn't in love with my husband. She was after something. The question was, what? But the next morning, I would find out something that shocked even me. Because when I followed Daniel the next day, I discovered that the woman he planned to leave me for wasn't just younger. She was hiding a dangerous secret that could destroy his entire life. And when I realized what it was, that's when my plan for revenge truly began. Because if Daniel wanted a divorce war, then I was about to show him exactly who he married. The next morning, I woke up with one clear decision in my mind. I wasn't going to cry anymore. Not yet. Not until I understood everything. Daniel had given me 10 days to sign those divorce papers. 10 days to quietly step aside while he walked into a brand new life with a younger woman. But if those 10 days were the time he thought he needed to escape me, then they were also the time I needed to expose the truth. I made myself a cup of coffee and sat by the kitchen window, staring out at the quiet street. The same street where Daniel and I had raised our boys. The same street where we used to watch them ride their bikes when they were little. 42 years of memories lived in that house. And now he wanted to throw it all away. I took a deep breath and looked at the photographs again. The woman with the dark hair. The confident smile. The way she leaned slightly toward Daniel in the picture, as if she already belonged beside him. I whispered to myself, "Who are you?" But I had a feeling I was about to find out. Because I knew exactly where Daniel would be that morning. The lake house. He mentioned it the night before, probably assuming I'd stay home crying while he enjoyed his freedom. But he underestimated me. I finished my coffee, grabbed my coat, and drove out of the neighborhood before the sun had fully risen. The lake house sat about 40 minutes outside the city. Daniel had bought it years ago after one of his biggest business deals. Back then, he said it would be our peaceful escape. We spent summers there. Cookouts. Fishing trips with the boys. Quiet evenings watching the sunset over the water. Now it felt like a place where my marriage was quietly being buried. I parked my car down the road where it wouldn't be seen and waited. For nearly an hour, nothing happened. Then finally, Daniel walked out of the house. He looked relaxed. Too relaxed for a man who had just destroyed his marriage. He checked his phone, got into his car, and drove off toward the city. I followed him. Not too close. Just enough to keep his car in sight. My heart pounded the entire drive. Part of me felt ridiculous, like some character in a detective movie. But another part of me felt something I hadn't felt in years. Control. For the first time since he handed me those papers, I wasn't just reacting to his decisions. I was watching, learning. And what I saw next made my stomach drop. Daniel didn't drive to his office. Instead, he pulled into the parking lot of that same rooftop restaurant I had seen in the photograph. The one with the glass windows. The one where he had been sitting across from her. I parked across the street and watched. 10 minutes later, she arrived. The woman from the picture stepped out of a white car and walked toward the restaurant entrance. Seeing her in real life felt different. She was even younger than I thought. Beautiful, yes, but also calculated. She moved with the confidence of someone who knew exactly what she was doing. And when she spotted Daniel waiting near the entrance, she ran toward him and wrapped her arms around his neck. Like they were a happy couple. Like I didn't exist. I felt a sharp pain in my chest. But I forced myself to stay calm. Because emotional pain was temporary. Truth was powerful. I stepped out of my car and slowly crossed the street. The restaurant was already open for lunch. And the hostess barely looked up when I walked inside. Daniel and the woman were seated at a table near the windows. They were laughing. Laughing. Like my 42-year marriage had never happened. I chose a table behind a large decorative plant where they couldn't easily see me. Then I listened. At first, their conversation was casual. But then the woman leaned forward and said something that made my heart stop. "So did she sign them yet?" Daniel shook his head. "Not yet. But she will. I gave her 10 days. The woman smiled. "Good. Because once it's finalized, we can finally move forward." Move forward. Just like that. Daniel reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "I promise you," he said softly. "Soon everything will be ours." Ours. I felt anger burning inside me, but I stayed quiet, because that single word told me something very important. This woman wasn't just after Daniel. She was after everything he owned. And Daniel, blinded by her youth and beauty, couldn't see it. But I could. And what happened next confirmed my suspicion. Because the woman leaned closer and whispered something that made Daniel laugh. But when she pulled back, I noticed something strange. For just a second, her smile disappeared. And the look in her eyes? Cold. Sharp. Calculating. That wasn't the look of a woman in love. That was the look of someone playing a long game. And in that moment, I realized something Daniel hadn't figured out yet. He thought he was leaving his wife for a younger woman. But the truth was far more dangerous. Because the woman he trusted was about to ruin him. And when I discovered the secret she was hiding from Daniel later that day, that's when my entire revenge plan came together. Because now I knew exactly how to turn the tables. After watching Daniel and that woman at the restaurant, I sat in my car for a long time without moving. My hands rested on the steering wheel, but my mind was racing. For 42 years, I believed I knew my husband better than anyone. I knew his habits, his moods, the way he thought during business deals. But sitting there that afternoon, watching him laugh with a woman half his age, I realized something painful. Daniel wasn't thinking clearly anymore. He wasn't the careful businessman I had supported for decades. He was a man blinded by attention, blinded by the excitement of feeling young again. And the woman sitting across from him knew exactly how to use that. But one thing kept bothering me. The way she asked him if I had signed the divorce papers yet. Not, "How is your wife doing?" Not, "Are you okay?" Her first concern was the papers. That told me everything. She wasn't interested in Daniel as a husband. She was interested in what came after the divorce. And if there was one thing I had learned from living alongside a successful businessman for decades, it was this. Whenever money is involved, there are always records. So instead of driving home, I drove straight downtown again. This time, not to the lawyer's office, but to a place Daniel never imagined I would go. His company headquarters. The large glass building stood tall over the busy street, just like it had for the last 15 years. I had been there many times before. Company dinners, charity events, holiday parties. But this time felt different. This time, I wasn't walking in as the proud wife of the owner. I was walking in as a woman looking for the truth. The receptionist recognized me immediately. "Mrs. Carter. It's so nice to see you." I smiled politely. "Hello, Lisa. Is Daniel here today?" She shook her head. "No, he hasn't come in yet." Of course he hadn't. He was too busy having lunch with his new girlfriend. But that actually helped me. "Would you mind if I stepped into his office for a moment?" I asked. Of course not. 42 years of marriage still opened doors. I walked down the long hallway toward Daniel's office, my heels echoing softly against the marble floor. When I stepped inside, the room felt strangely unfamiliar. The large wooden desk, the leather chair, the shelves filled with awards and framed photographs. There was even a photo of us from 10 years ago at a charity gala. Daniel had his arm around me, smiling proudly. Looking at it now felt almost surreal. I slowly sat down in his chair and opened the laptop on his desk. Normally it was password protected, but Daniel had always been predictable. He used the same password for almost everything. Our anniversary date. I typed it in. The computer unlocked immediately. A sad smile crossed my face. Still predictable. I whispered. I started browsing through his emails. At first it was all business. Contracts, meeting requests, financial reports. But then something caught my eye. A folder labeled Private Investments. That was unusual. Daniel usually discussed investment opportunities with me. It had always been something we planned together. But this folder was new. I clicked it. Inside were several documents. And one name appeared over and over again. Vanessa Reed. My heart skipped a beat. Vanessa. So that was her name. I opened the first document. It was a proposal for a large investment Daniel had made recently, Millions of dollars into a startup company. The company's listed co-founder? Vanessa Reed. I leaned back slowly, trying to process what I was seeing. So the young woman wasn't just Daniel's girlfriend. She was his business partner. That explained the confidence. But then I opened another document. And that's when my entire body went cold. Because buried inside the financial report was a note from Daniel's accountant. A warning. It read, "After reviewing Vanessa Reed's previous business history, I strongly advise caution. Her last 2 ventures resulted in serious legal disputes and financial losses for her partners." Legal disputes. Financial losses. I quickly searched her name online. Several articles appeared. Old news reports. Court filings. And suddenly the truth started to unfold in front of me. Vanessa Reed had a pattern. She targeted wealthy men, built businesses with them, encouraged large investments. And when the companies collapsed, the men were left with massive losses. While she quietly walked away, I stared at the screen in disbelief. Daniel thought he had found the love of his life. But in reality, he had just walked straight into a trap. And if everything went according to Vanessa's plan, he wasn't just going to lose his marriage. He was going to lose his entire fortune. For a long moment, I just sat there thinking, Daniel had betrayed me. That was true. But watching him destroy his entire life for a woman like Vanessa? That wasn't something I could ignore. Not after 42 years together. But then another thought crossed my mind. If Vanessa was planning to take everything from Daniel, then maybe, just maybe, I could use that to my advantage. Because Daniel gave me 10 days to sign those divorce papers. And now I had the perfect way to spend those 10 days. I was going to let Vanessa believe her plan was working. I was going to let Daniel think he had already won. And then, at the perfect moment, I would expose everything. But what happened on day 6 of those 10 days shocked even me. Because the moment Vanessa realized I knew her secret, she did something that proved just how dangerous she really was. And that's when this story stopped being just about divorce and turned into something far more serious. By the 6th day after my husband handed me those divorce papers, I was no longer the broken woman crying at the kitchen table. No. By day 6, I had something much stronger than tears. I had the truth. And the truth about Vanessa Reed was far uglier than Daniel could ever imagine. For the past few days, I had quietly gathered everything I could about her. Court records, business filings, old interviews, even social media accounts she had tried to delete. And the more I looked, the clearer the pattern became. Vanessa Reed didn't fall in love with wealthy men. She studied them. She would enter their lives through business opportunities, charm them with confidence and admiration, convince them to invest in risky projects, and once the money was tied up, everything would collapse. But somehow Vanessa always walked away clean. The men. They were left bankrupt, embarrassed, and alone. Daniel wasn't the first man she had targeted. He was simply the next one. But what fascinated me the most was how patient she was. This wasn't some quick scam. She built trust slowly. Smiles. Compliments. Admiration. Exactly the kind of attention a man in his late 60s, desperate to feel young again, would fall for. And Daniel had fallen for it completely. But Vanessa didn't know something important. She thought the only obstacle between her and Daniel's fortune was me signing those divorce papers. She believed I was just the emotional wife who would cry for a few days and quietly disappear. She had no idea that the woman she was trying to replace had spent 42 years learning the world of business, right beside her husband. So on day 6, I decided it was time for our first meeting. I called the restaurant where I had seen them earlier that week. Luckily, the manager recognized my voice. Daniel and I had been regular guests there for years. "Mrs. Carter, of course we can reserve a table for you." "Perfect," I said calmly. "And could you place it near the window?" Right where Daniel had sat with Vanessa. That evening, I arrived early and ordered a simple glass of iced tea. Then I waited. And right on schedule. They walked in together. Daniel looked relaxed. Vanessa looked radiant. Her arm slipped comfortably through his, as if she already owned his future. The hostess greeted them and started leading them toward a table. But halfway across the room, Vanessa noticed me. I saw it instantly. Her confident smile froze for a split second. Daniel followed her gaze. And when he saw me sitting there calmly, his face drained of color. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then I gave them a gentle smile and raised my glass slightly. Good evening, Daniel. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. Slowly, they walked toward my table. Daniel looked nervous. But Vanessa? Vanessa recovered quickly. She slipped into the chair across from me like she belonged there. Up close, I could see just how carefully she controlled her expressions. Every smile was calculated. Every movement precise. So, she said sweetly, you must be Evelyn. I smiled politely. And you must be Vanessa. Daniel cleared his throat awkwardly. Evelyn, this isn't really the place. Oh, don't worry, I said calmly. I'm not here to cause a scene. Vanessa tilted her head slightly. That's good to hear. I leaned forward just a little. Actually, I just wanted to meet the woman who plans to build a future with my husband. Her smile widened. Well, life moves in unexpected directions sometimes. Yes, I said softly. It certainly does. Daniel looked deeply uncomfortable, but Vanessa remained perfectly composed. Until I asked one simple question. Tell me something, Vanessa, I said. Do Daniel's investors know about what happened with your last company? Her smile vanished. Just for a second. But it was enough. Daniel frowned. What do you mean? I reached calmly into my purse and placed a folded document on the table. Court records. Vanessa's eyes dropped to the paper. And that was the first moment I saw genuine panic flash across her face. You see, I continued gently, I've had a lot of time these past 6 days to do a little research. Daniel picked up the paper. His eyebrows slowly pulled together as he read. Vanessa, what is this? Her voice came out tight. Daniel, it's not what it looks like. But I simply sat back in my chair and watched. Because for the first time since this nightmare began, the balance of power had shifted. Vanessa had spent years manipulating wealthy men who didn't know her past. But Daniel had one disadvantage those other men didn't. He had a wife who knew exactly how to find the truth. And this was only the beginning. Because what I planned to reveal on day 8 would destroy Vanessa's entire plan. And when Daniel finally understood the trap he had walked into, he wouldn't just regret divorcing me. He would realize something far worse. He had almost handed his entire life to a woman who was about to destroy him. When I placed those court records on the table, the air between the three of us changed instantly. For the first time since Daniel handed me those divorce papers, I wasn't the woman being pushed aside anymore. Now they were the ones feeling uncomfortable. Daniel kept staring at the document in his hands, reading the same lines over and over as if his brain refused to understand them. Financial fraud investigation, civil dispute, investor lawsuits. He slowly looked up at Vanessa. What is this? Vanessa's face had lost some of that perfect confidence she carried earlier. But I had to give her credit. She recovered quickly. She forced a small laugh. Daniel, you know how business works, she said smoothly. Sometimes investors get angry when startups fail. Daniel still looked confused. But this says. It says accusations, she interrupted gently. Nothing was proven. Then she turned her eyes toward me. Cold. Sharp. You went digging into my past, she said quietly. I held her gaze without blinking. I did. Daniel looked back and forth between us, clearly struggling to process what was happening. For the past few months he had been living in a fantasy. A younger woman who admired him, a new business opportunity, a fresh start. And now that fantasy had just developed its first crack. But Vanessa wasn't ready to lose control yet. She leaned toward Daniel and placed her hand softly on his arm. Daniel, sweetheart, think about this, she said calmly. Your wife is about to lose half of everything you built. Of course she's trying to create drama. That word, drama. Like 42 years of marriage were nothing more than a jealous tantrum. I almost laughed. Instead, I simply reached into my purse again. I thought you might say something like that, I replied. Then I placed a second document on the table. This one wasn't a court record. It was a news article. Daniel picked it up slowly. The headline read, Tech startup collapse leaves investors facing millions in losses. Below the headline was a photograph. Vanessa Reed, standing beside a former business partner who looked about Daniel's age. Daniel's eyes widened slightly. Vanessa's jaw tightened. "Daniel," she said quickly. That situation was completely different. But he wasn't listening to her anymore. He kept reading, every line slowly draining the color from his face. Because the article described exactly what had happened. A wealthy investor. A promising startup. Millions of dollars poured into a company that collapsed less than a year later. And the man who invested everything? He ended up in bankruptcy court. Vanessa leaned back in her chair and crossed her arms. "So what?" she snapped. "Yes, that business failed. That happens in entrepreneurship." I watched Daniel carefully, because now the doubt had begun. And doubt, once it enters someone's mind, grows very quickly. "Daniel," she said softly again, switching back to her sweet voice. "You know me. You know I would never do something like that to you." But the damage had already started. Daniel slowly looked up from the article. "Why didn't you tell me about this?" Vanessa hesitated. Just for a second. But that second said everything. "It wasn't important," she replied. Daniel frowned. "Millions of dollars lost isn't important." The tension at the table felt electric now. Other diners were starting to glance in our direction. But none of that mattered. Because the real storm was happening right here. I took a quiet sip of my iced tea and spoke calmly. "You see, Daniel, I didn't come here tonight to embarrass you." Both of them looked at me. "I came here because after 42 years of marriage, I couldn't watch you walk into something that would destroy you." Vanessa scoffed. "Oh please." But Daniel didn't laugh. He looked down at the documents again. His voice came out quieter now. "How much money did that investor lose?" Vanessa's expression hardened. "That situation has nothing to do with us." "Answer the question." The way he said it surprised even me. For the first time since this entire mess started, Daniel sounded like the old Daniel. The careful businessman. The man who asked difficult questions before signing deals. Vanessa stared at him for a moment before replying. $3 million. Daniel's fingers tightened around the paper. $3 million. That was enough to destroy someone's life. The silence at the table grew heavy. Finally, Vanessa stood up abruptly. "I don't need to sit here and be interrogated by your jealous wife," she said sharply. She grabbed her purse and looked down at Daniel. "Call me when you're done dealing with this nonsense." Then she walked out of the restaurant without looking back. Daniel sat there in silence, still staring at the documents. For a long time, neither of us spoke. Finally, he looked up at me. And for the first time in days, the arrogance in his eyes was gone. "What else do you know?" he asked quietly. I folded my hands calmly on the table. Because now we had reached the most important part. "Daniel," I said gently, "today is only day 7. He frowned slightly. "What does that mean?" "It means you still have 3 days left before those divorce papers need my signature." He stared at me, confused. And that's when I told him something that made his entire expression change. "By day 10, I continued softly, "you're going to discover something about Vanessa Reed that will make tonight look like a small misunderstanding." Daniel's voice dropped. "What are you talking about?" I stood up, placing the documents neatly back into my purse. "You wanted a divorce in 10 days, I said calmly. "So let's finish this story in 10 days. Then I walked out of the restaurant, leaving Daniel sitting there alone. But what he didn't know yet was that the information I planned to reveal on day 9 wasn't just about Vanessa's past. It was about something she had already started doing with Daniel's money. And when he discovered the truth, he would realize he had come dangerously close to losing everything he had ever built. By the time day 8 arrived, something had already changed in Daniel. I could hear it in his voice the night after the restaurant confrontation. He had called me. Not with anger. Not with arrogance. But with uncertainty. "Evelyn, we need to talk." For 42 years, I had learned how to read every tone in that man's voice. And that night, I heard something I hadn't heard in a long time. Fear. Not fear of losing me. Not yet. Fear of realizing he might have made a terrible mistake. But I didn't rush to comfort him. No. Daniel had rushed into a fantasy with Vanessa. And now it was time for reality to slowly catch up with him. So when he asked to meet the next morning at his office, I simply said one word: fine. The next day I walked into the same glass building where I had quietly investigated his computer just days earlier. But this time, the atmosphere felt different. The receptionist looked nervous. Several employees whispered to each other as I passed through the hallway. Something had clearly happened. When I reached Daniel's office, the door was already open. He was standing by the window, staring down at the city like a man trying to solve a puzzle that suddenly made no sense. For the first time in years, he looked tired, older. When he turned around and saw me, his usual confidence was gone. "Sit down," he said quietly. I did. He walked back to his desk and placed a thick folder in front of me. "I looked into what you showed me last night," he said. I raised an eyebrow slightly. "And?" He exhaled slowly. "And I don't like what I found." I opened the folder. Inside were printed emails, financial reports, background checks. Daniel had clearly spent the entire night digging into Vanessa's past. But what caught my attention most was the expression on his face. Confusion mixed with anger. "Why didn't you tell me about this sooner?" he asked. I looked up at him calmly. "You didn't ask." He rubbed his forehead. "Evelyn, this woman, these lawsuits, these failed companies." He stopped mid-sentence. For the first time, Daniel Carter, the confident businessman who had built an empire, looked completely unsure. "Do you really think she's using me?" he asked. That question almost broke my heart, because despite everything he had done, I still recognized the man I had spent my life with, the man who used to trust my judgment more than anyone else's. But instead of answering immediately, I reached into my purse and pulled out one last document. I placed it gently on his desk. "Before you decide what to believe," I said softly, "you should read that." Daniel frowned and picked it up. At first, his eyes moved slowly across the page. Then suddenly, they stopped. His entire body stiffened. "What is this?" "It's a transfer record," I replied calmly. His voice dropped lower. "No, that's impossible." But it wasn't, because the document showed something Daniel had never noticed. 2 weeks earlier, Vanessa had convinced him to move a large amount of company funds into a temporary investment account. She had explained it as part of their new business project. Daniel trusted her, so he signed the authorization. But what he hadn't realized was that Vanessa had quietly listed herself as the secondary account controller, which meant something very simple. She had access to the money. Daniel looked up at me, his face pale. "How much?" I answered gently. $2 million. The silence in the room became suffocating. Daniel grabbed the phone on his desk and immediately dialed his financial advisor. "Tom, I need you to check something right now," he said urgently. He waited. Then his face slowly lost its remaining color. "Are you serious?" A long pause followed. Finally he whispered, "All right, thank you." He slowly hung up the phone. I didn't need to ask what Tom had told him, because the answer was written all over Daniel's face. "She moved it," he said quietly. "Yes. Yesterday." I nodded. The timing wasn't a coincidence. After our confrontation at the restaurant, Vanessa had realized something. Her plan was no longer safe. And when people like Vanessa realize they're about to lose control, they move quickly. Daniel sat down heavily in his chair. "She's leaving the country," he murmured. "That was always the plan," I replied softly. For several minutes, Daniel didn't speak. Then he looked at me. Really looked at me. Not like the woman he wanted to divorce, but like the partner who had stood beside him for 42 years. "Why are you helping me?" he asked quietly. That question sat between us for a moment, because the answer wasn't simple. Finally I said the truth. Because I wasn't going to let the man I built a life with destroy everything we created, over a lie. Daniel's eyes filled with something I hadn't seen in a long time. Regret. But this story wasn't over yet, because there was still day 9. And what Daniel didn't know yet was that Vanessa Reed had already made one final move before disappearing. A move that could destroy Daniel's company completely, unless we stopped her before the 10th day arrived. By the time day 9 arrived, Daniel Carter was no longer the confident man who had casually handed me divorce papers across our anniversary table. The man sitting in his office that morning looked like someone who had just woken up from a very dangerous dream, and reality was finally starting to hit him. The night before, we had discovered that Vanessa had already moved $2 million from the investment account Daniel created for their new business venture. But that money wasn't the only problem, because early the next morning, Daniel's financial advisor called again. I was sitting across from Daniel in his office when the phone rang. The tension in the room was so thick that even the quiet buzz of his phone sounded loud. Daniel picked it up immediately. "Tom." He listened for a moment. Then his expression changed. "What do you mean the board meeting was moved up?" I looked at him carefully. Something else was wrong. Daniel stood up slowly from his chair. "Yes. I'll be there in 20 minutes, he said. He hung up the phone and looked at me. "That was Tom," he said quietly. "What happened?" He rubbed the back of his neck like he used to do when he was under pressure during big business deals. "The board is calling an emergency meeting." "Why?" Daniel hesitated. Then he said something that made my stomach tighten. "Because Vanessa filed paperwork yesterday." My mind immediately started connecting the pieces. What kind of paperwork? Daniel walked to his desk and opened a folder Tom had sent over. Then he handed me the document. And the moment I read it, I understood exactly what Vanessa had done. She had filed a proposal claiming partial ownership in the new startup division Daniel had recently created under his company. The division funded by the $2 million she had just moved, which meant something very dangerous. If the company collapsed, Daniel's entire corporation could become legally tied to that loss. It was a classic trap. One final move before disappearing. I slowly looked up at Daniel. "She's trying to drag your company down with her." Daniel ran a hand through his hair. "That division is connected to several of our main investors," he said. "If they think there's financial fraud involved." He didn't need to finish the sentence. The damage would be massive. Investors pulling out. Stock values dropping. Years of work destroyed. And Vanessa? She would already be gone. I stood up calmly. "Then we need to get to that meeting." 20 minutes later, we walked into the large boardroom together. Several executives were already seated around the long table. Most of them looked confused. A few looked concerned. But the moment Daniel entered, the room fell silent. The chairman of the board spoke first. "Daniel, we need to discuss this situation with Ms. Reed." Daniel placed the documents on the table. "There is no situation with Vanessa Reed anymore," he said firmly. The room exchanged puzzled looks. One board member leaned forward. "Then why did she file a partnership claim yesterday?" Daniel looked around the room for a moment. Then he did something that surprised even me. He looked at me. For 42 years he had trusted my instincts in private. Now he was silently asking if I was ready. I gave him a small nod. Daniel turned back to the board. "Because Vanessa Reed was attempting to commit financial fraud using company funds," he said calmly. The room exploded with questions. "Fraud? What are you talking about?" Daniel raised his hand to quiet them. Then he placed the documents I had gathered on the table. Court records, news articles, financial transfers, everything. For the next 15 minutes, the board members read through the evidence in stunned silence. Finally, the chairman leaned back in his chair. "You're saying she planned this entire investment as a setup?" "Yes." Another executive shook his head in disbelief. "And she already moved the money?" Daniel nodded. "But we caught it early." Then he turned toward me. "And thanks to Evelyn, we know exactly how she planned to do it." Several of the board members looked at me with curiosity. They had always known me as Daniel's wife. But now they were realizing something else. I wasn't just a wife. I had been part of Daniel's decisions for decades. And this time, I had just helped save his company. The chairman closed the folder slowly. "We'll begin legal action immediately," he said. But even as the meeting ended, I could see the weight still sitting on Daniel's shoulders. Because the money Vanessa took might still be gone. And the damage to Daniel's pride? That was something no lawyer could fix. As we walked out of the boardroom, Daniel stopped in the hallway. For a moment he just looked at me. Not like a husband looking at his wife, like a man realizing something he had almost thrown away. Tomorrow is day 10, he said quietly. Yes. His voice was softer now. Evelyn, about the divorce papers. But I raised my hand slightly. Let's talk tomorrow, I said. Because the story wasn't finished yet. And Daniel still had one final lesson to learn. Tomorrow was the day he had given me as a deadline. The day I was supposed to sign the divorce papers. But what Daniel didn't know yet was that day 10 would be the day the entire situation turned upside down. Because tomorrow, he wouldn't be asking for my signature anymore. He would be begging me not to give it. The morning of day 10 arrived quietly. 10 days earlier, my husband had sat across from me at our anniversary dinner and calmly handed me divorce papers like our 42 years together meant nothing. He had given me 10 days to sign them, 10 days to disappear from his life. But that morning, everything felt different. The house was silent as sunlight poured through the kitchen windows. I sat at the same table where I had cried the night he left, staring at the same envelope that had shattered my world. The divorce papers were still inside, unsigned, untouched. I ran my fingers slowly across the envelope and took a deep breath. 10 days ago, I had felt broken. Today, I felt something else entirely. Calm. Because during those 10 days, the truth had come out. Vanessa Reed was gone. Lawyers were already tracking the money she had taken. And Daniel's board had started legal action against her. The empire Daniel had spent decades building had narrowly escaped disaster. And the only reason it had survived was because the wife he tried to throw away refused to let him destroy himself. Around 9 a.m., I heard a car pull into the driveway. I didn't even need to look out the window. I knew who it was. A few seconds later, the front door opened slowly. Daniel stepped inside. For a moment, he just stood there quietly, looking around the house like he was seeing it for the first time. The family photos on the wall. The living room where we had spent Christmas mornings with our boys. The staircase where he used to carry them to bed when they fell asleep watching movies. 42 years of memories surrounded him. And for the first time since this started, I could see the weight of those memories in his eyes. He walked into the kitchen and stopped when he saw the envelope on the table. The papers, he said softly. Yes. Neither of us spoke for a few seconds. Finally, Daniel pulled out the chair across from me and sat down. The same seat he had taken 10 nights earlier. But he looked like a completely different man now. Did you sign them? He asked quietly. I slid the envelope toward him. You should open it. His hands moved slowly as he pulled the documents out. He flipped through the pages carefully. Then he stopped. There was no signature. His shoulders dropped slightly in relief. You didn't sign them, he said. No. For a moment, silence filled the kitchen again. Then Daniel did something I had never seen him do before in 42 years of marriage. He lowered his head. I'm sorry, he whispered. The words sounded heavy. Real. I let my ego destroy my judgment, he continued. I thought I deserved something new. Something exciting. He laughed bitterly. But all I almost got was a disaster that would have taken everything from me. He looked up at me again. Evelyn, you saved me. I watched him carefully. Because 10 days earlier, this same man had looked at me like I was something he could simply replace. And now, he looked like a man realizing how close he came to losing the most important thing in his life. I gave you 10 days to sign those papers, he said quietly. Yes. His voice cracked slightly. But today, I'm asking you not to. There it was. The moment he never expected. The moment where the power had completely shifted. Daniel reached across the table, his hand trembling slightly. Please don't divorce me, he said. I know I don't deserve another chance. I know what I did was unforgivable. But Evelyn, 42 years doesn't disappear because of one terrible mistake. I looked down at his hand on the table. Then I looked at the envelope. For 10 days I had turned the entire situation around. Not by screaming. Not by begging. But by standing strong and showing Daniel exactly what he had almost lost. Finally, I spoke. Daniel, those 10 days you gave me changed everything. He nodded slowly. I know. You thought I would spend those days crying and begging you to stay. His eyes filled with regret. I was wrong. Yes, I said softly. You were. I picked up the envelope and gently slid it back toward him. But those 10 days also reminded me of something important. What's that? I looked directly into his eyes. That I'm stronger than you ever realized. Daniel nodded again. I know that now. For a long moment, neither of us moved. Then I stood up from the table, and for the first time in 10 days, I smiled. Come on, I said. He looked confused. Where? I walked toward the living room, to start figuring out what the next 42 years are going to look like. Daniel let out a breath that sounded like it had been trapped inside his chest for days. Then he followed me, and that was the moment he truly understood something he should have known all along. The woman he tried to replace was the same woman who had just saved his life, his company, and his future. And from that day forward, Daniel Carter never underestimated his wife again.